Hey everybody, Tim Ulbrich here, and welcome to this week's episode of the YFP podcast, where we strive to inspire and encourage you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. Today, I'm going to be talking about something that's come up again and again, not only in the work that I've done and the conversations I've had with pharmacists, but also in my own career, in my own financial journey. And that is the tension between playing it safe and taking some calculated risks. Now, here's the truth, and what we'll talk about today, that you're not going to take calculated risks if you're in survival mode financially. And if you don't take some risk, you're probably going to be leaving something on the table. And only you know what that something is. Maybe it's a dream that you've been sitting on, a goal that you have for early retirement, perhaps an idea that you want to pursue, an investment that you want to make, or a legacy that you want to leave through some philanthropic giving and efforts. Only you know what that goal is. But the question is, how do you put yourself in a position to take those calculated risks rather than avoiding them out of fear? For me in my journey, it really started with creating what I call, what we'll talk about today, a financial floor. When my wife Jess and I were starting our path financially together after 2008, finishing up pharmacy school, 2009, finishing residency, we had approximately $200,000 of student loan debt. And I can tell you at that moment, I was not thinking about starting a business. I wasn't thinking about buying an investment property. I wasn't thinking about taking calculated risk. I was just trying to get through the month to month, right? We were in survival mode. And in that mode, risk can feel impossible. We were in that season unable to look up and out to see some opportunities that might exist, because the reality was we had to look down to clean up some of the student loan debt and to build the rest of the financial foundation. But once we began to build traction by building an emergency fund, by having a student loan repayment strategy and seeing the momentum of that, by beginning to invest consistently and to start to see the compounding of those investments, from that point, we began to create a foundation. We began to create the financial floor. And that foundation, that financial floor, would slowly over time give us some options. So hopefully you're asking, what does a financial floor look like, right? In my opinion, it means four things in particular. Number one, that you have an adequate emergency fund, 3 to 6 times, roughly speaking, essential expenses, right? It goes without saying that if we're faced with an emergency that we can't quickly fund and move on, that would require us to either slow down another goal or, worse off, maybe take on some debt to fund that emergency, we're going to constantly be in that defensive mode, right? So the goal of an emergency fund is not only to have that liquid cash available to be able to fund that emergency when it happens, not if it happens, but when it happens, but also there's an important mindset component to an emergency fund that allows us to move forward with the financial plan and an understanding that these things will happen, but that we've got a plan in place for when they happen. Don't underestimate the power of the momentum that can come from that. The second thing is having a plan to pay down the debt. Now, there's, of course, all types of debt that's not created equal, right? It could be credit card debt, could be student loan debt, could be car debt, could be a mortgage. The key here, notice I did not say become debt-free. For some, that might be the goal, and that certainly is a worthy goal. But it's about having an intentional plan and prioritization for the debt, to know that we've thought about the debt, to know that we've considered how it fits into the rest of the financial plan, to notice how we feel emotionally about the debt and the interest rates and the impact that it's having, and to have a plan for how we're going to pay off the various debts. Once we are able to see that debt and know that we have it budgeted and planned for, even if that number doesn't change significantly the next month or the month after that, again, it's about building this momentum. So the first thing was having an adequate emergency fund. The second thing, of course, was having a plan for our debt repayment. The third thing is making sure that we have the insurance part of the plan in place. I would also add into here the estate planning part for those that have dependents especially. But when we think about things like term life insurance, long-term disability insurance, perhaps umbrella insurance, more insurance to consider on top of that. But we want to make sure that we have enough coverage that if something catastrophic were to happen, we have a plan. Again, not only practically speaking, we have a plan, but also emotionally knowing that we're prepared. So those policies are going to be really important, and we want to make sure that we're not overinsured as well, making sure that we're not spending dollars on insurance premiums that perhaps we don't need that could be used elsewhere in the financial plan. And then finally, we want to have an automated plan for our investing. So we want to have some clarity around how much is it going to take when it comes to things like planning for retirement or long-term savings goals. And knowing what does that mean for us monthly? And are we able to automate those contributions monthly, knowing that we've budgeted for them, we plan for them in the context of these other goals that we're working on? So looking at these 4 things again related to the financial floor, we've got an adequate emergency fund. We have a plan to pay down the debt. We've got the insurance and the estate plan buttoned up, and we've got an automated plan for investing. Now, when I hear those 4 things, and I think back to my own journey starting in 2008, 2009, coming out with a couple $100,000 of debt, really spinning financially, kind of treading water. All of these things were pieces of the puzzle that I knew were out there, but I didn't necessarily know the nuances of what was all involved to be able to plan, prioritize, and strategize. And these unanswered questions can be exhausting. Not only exhausting to the financial plan, but exhausting emotionally as well. So if you contrast that feeling with the feelings that would come from knowing that, hey, you've got a fully funded emergency fund. We've got a specific strategy that is optimized for the debt repayment and that considers the other goals in the financial plan. We've got the at least the basics of the insurance coverage and the estate planning portion covered. And we've got a plan that's automating our investments each month. So we're not wondering, are we going to achieve some of these long-term savings goals? Just imagine for a moment, and for those of you that are there, perhaps some feelings of gratitude. For those that are not, imagine what that would feel like emotionally, knowing that you have that floor in place, that foundation in place, that confidence in which you can operate from. Those are the components of the financial floor that really shifted me from just surviving to ultimately feeling like we could step out and take some bigger risks. Now, one of the first places that I saw this play out was actually in my career, right? Early on, when we were treading water financially, I didn't feel like I was in a position to negotiate for myself. One of the things we talk about with negotiation is leverage. And one of the pieces of leverage is understanding your own financial position and what type of risk you can take, right? I was afraid of rocking the boat because I needed that paycheck month to month. Now, a lot of that was probably head trash, but nonetheless, not having a strong financial foundation and floor really impeded my ability, or at least my ability to be confident in those negotiations. But once we had that floor in place, I began to find my voice. I began to find the confidence to negotiate for raises, for flexibility, for new opportunities. And those negotiations would compound over time and really did make a big difference in my career trajectory and income growth. Another area that I saw this financial floor really play out in my own career and financial journey was the courage to be able to start the business. So when I started YFP, Your Financial Pharmacist, back in 2015, I knew that there was risk involved, but I also knew that we had our financial floor in place. We had finished paying off that $200,000 student loan debt. We had built the reserves and the emergency fund, right? We had the automations or the base involved for the investing. We had the insurance parts of the plan in place. So we knew that if things didn't go perfectly, we weren't going to lose everything. We weren't at a high risk position. And that security ultimately gave me the freedom to lean into the vision of starting the business in 2015. And finally, a third area that really jumps out to me as I look backwards of the importance of this financial floor and taking risk is giving me the confidence to start building investments outside of my primary career and even outside of building the business at YFP. So we would eventually buy an investment property in 2019, something I would have probably never considered before if we didn't already have the basics covered. We also began to invest in some other businesses. Were these risks? Are they risks? Absolutely. But because the foundation was there, they were calculated risk, right? Not reckless ones along the way. So that's the first part that I wanted to talk about, the financial floor. But here's where I had to learn something deeper. The financial floor on its own wasn't enough. There's another layer, and that other layer is the emotional floor. And to be honest, this was the harder work for me, and I suspect for many listening, this might also be the harder work for you. The emotional floor is about mindset. It's about developing a belief in yourself to be able to take some of these risks. It's about expecting failure. As you take risks, failure are a part of the process, and we need to learn to embrace and learn from that. It's about getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And when I stepped into entrepreneurship, building the business starting back in 2015, I had to begin to face all of this head on, right? The doubts, the what ifs, the voices in my head asking, who do you think you are? What are you building, right? You're a pharmacist. This is not what you trained to do. And the only way forward was to build that emotional floor through belief, through resilience, through community. And community matters, right? I have over time learned the importance of surrounding myself with people who have challenged me to think bigger, who have held me accountable, who are willing to challenge me when I was selling myself short. And these two areas, the financial floor and the emotional floor, they're interconnected, right? Because until you have both the financial floor and the emotional floor in place, you'll subconsciously shorten your leash on what's possible. Fear of failure will keep you from stepping out and stepping forward. And I would argue that's a tragedy, not just for yourself, but for everyone who could benefit from you showing up as the best version of yourself. So if you're listening today and you feel like you're in a rut, or you feel like the flame that once burned bright has gone dim, ask yourself what might be missing. My guess is that flame, it's not gone. It's just been boxed in, suffocated by financial pressures, or perhaps by a mindset that hasn't been given the oxygen it needs to thrive. So here's my encouragement. Build your floor. Start with the financial basics to create security, and then lean into the emotional work to create the belief that we talked about.